offered as debt by her own mother. She was taken in by a mafia boss who responded unexpectedly. A true story. Told in third person. Nadia was tired. That was the first thing to know about her. Not the kind of tired that goes away after a good night's sleep, but the kind that lives behind the eyes, the kind that builds up slowly over years of doing everything yourself, while someone else watches. She had just finished a double shift at the small diner on the corner of 5th when she pushed open the door to her apartment that Thursday night in late November. Her feet hurt. Her shoulders were stiff. All she wanted was a glass of water and to sit down for 5 minutes without anyone needing something from her. She smelled cigarette smoke before she even saw her mother. Irene was sitting in the dark living room, both hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall like it owed her something. 2 men stood near the front door, in expensive suits that did not belong in this apartment, in this neighborhood, in this part of anyone's life. Nadia looked at her mother first, then at the men, then back at her mother, waiting for some kind of explanation that would make this make sense. One of the men stepped forward and held out a plain white envelope. Inside was a single note, handwritten on thick paper. It said that her mother owed a man named Roman Castle $180,000. It also said that Irene had offered Nadia as collateral until the debt was settled. The note said she would be leaving tonight. Nadia lowered the paper slowly. She looked at her mother and waited. She told herself that maybe Irene would stand up. Maybe she would say this was a misunderstanding, some desperate thing that had gone too far. Nadia had been waiting for her mother to do the right thing for 22 years. She was still waiting. Irene lit a cigarette and looked out the window. Nadia picked up her coat from the hook by the door. She did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say that Irene's silence had not already said for her. The drive out of the city took nearly an hour. Nobody spoke. Nadia sat in the back seat and watched the city lights thin out and disappear, replaced by dark roads and open fields. When the car finally stopped, she stepped out into cold night air and looked up at a house that was bigger than anything she had ever stood in front of. Iron gates, gravel paths, tall windows glowing from the inside, with a warm, amber light that felt almost insulting given the circumstances. Guards stood at the edges of the property, still and quiet, watching without watching. A woman in her 60s came to the front door. She introduced herself as Mrs. Aldrin and walked Nadia through the entrance hall with the calm, practiced ease of someone who had seen all kinds of things and was not rattled by any of them. "Mr. Castle has 3 rules for you," Mrs. Aldrin said, leading her up the staircase. "You eat at the table. You don't go to the East Wing. And you don't lie to him. Follow those 3 things, and you will be fine." Nadia did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the clean, too-soft bed, in a room that was nicer than any room she had ever slept in, and she stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what came next. She had no phone signal. She had no plan. She was inside a stranger's house because her own mother had handed her over like an old piece of furniture, something to be moved around at someone else's convenience. She met Roman the next morning. She had built a picture of him in her head overnight, all sharp edges and cruelty, the kind of man who looked at people and saw only what they were worth to him. She braced herself, walking down the stairs, chin up, jaw tight, ready for whatever a man like that looked like up close. He was sitting at the far end of a long dining table, reading a financial report, drinking black coffee. He looked up when she walked in. He had dark, quiet eyes, and a face that gave nothing away. And for a long moment, he simply looked at her, the way you look at something you are trying to understand. "Sit down," he said. "You haven't eaten." That was it. No speech, no threats, no explanation of any kind. He went back to his papers. A plate of food appeared in front of her, and Nadia sat down and ate eggs, in the strangest silence of her life, across a long table from a man whose name made people in certain parts of the city lower their voices when they said it. She did not know what to make of it. Cruelty she could have understood. This she could not. Days passed, then a week, then 2. Nobody asked anything of Nadia. She was not put to work. She was not locked in. She could walk in the gardens, use the library, eat whatever was in the kitchen. Guards followed at a quiet distance but never spoke to her or stood in her way. It was the most freedom she had experienced inside 4 walls in years, which was its own kind of unsettling when she thought about it too hard. She started to wonder what she was actually there for. She found out by accident one evening, coming around the corner of a corridor, and stopping dead when she heard Roman speaking to Marco, his second in command, a broad-shouldered, observant man who seemed to see everything without being asked to. She should have walked away. She did not. What she heard made her press her back against the cold wall and hold her breath. Roman had known about her mother's debt for months. He had also known that Irene had been in contact with another man, someone far more dangerous, the kind whose reputation was not built on restraint. Irene had been planning to pass Nadia to him. Not as collateral, as something else entirely, something Nadia did not let herself think about too directly. Roman had stepped in first, quietly, without announcing himself. He had taken the debt, brought Nadia here, and made sure the other man understood clearly that she was no longer available. He had not told her any of this. Nadia found him in the corridor 10 minutes later. She was shaking, though she held herself very still. "You should have told me," she said. He looked at her with that same unreadable expression he always carried. "You were in danger, now you're not. When the world outside is safe enough for you, you'll go." She wanted to be angry. She almost was. But standing there, looking at a man who had done something quietly decent and told no one about it, she found that the anger could not quite pull itself together the way it was supposed to. She went back to her room and sat with it for a long time. She broke Mrs. Aldrin's second rule on a Tuesday afternoon in her third week at the estate. She had not planned to. She had wandered further than usual down a corridor she had not explored before, and the door to the east wing was simply there, slightly open, a thin strip of darkness beyond it, as if someone had forgotten, or had simply stopped caring anymore. She pushed it open and walked through, and the first thing she noticed was that it was colder there. The second thing was a closed door at the far end with a small strip of faint light beneath it. Inside was a girl's bedroom, left exactly as it had been, neatly kept but clearly old, the kind of stillness that collects in a room where no one has lived for a long time, where everything has been preserved, not out of hope, but out of an inability to let go. Ballet shoes on the corner of the desk. A stack of books with paper bookmarks sticking out at angles. A red coat hanging on the back of the door. On the wall above the desk was a photograph. A young woman, maybe 19, laughing at something just out of frame, caught mid-spin, wearing the red coat. She looked like someone who had not yet learned that the world could take things from you without any warning. Mrs. Aldrin appeared in the doorway behind Nadia. She did not scold her. "That was Elena," she said quietly, "his younger sister. She was killed 6 years ago. There was a conflict. She was somewhere she should never have been, and it was because of him. He has carried that every single day since." Nadia looked at the photograph for a long time. There was something in Elena's face she recognized, a kind of brightness that had to work hard to stay bright. A girl who had survived all kinds of things and smiled anyway. Right up until she didn't. Before she left the room, Nadia picked up a small wildflower she had pressed between the pages of a library book a few days earlier, carrying it in her pocket without quite knowing why. She set it down gently outside the east wing door on her way back down the corridor. She could not explain the reason. It just felt like the right thing to do. Roman found it the next morning. He stood in front of that small, dried flower for almost a full minute. Marco watched from the far end of the hallway and said nothing. After that, something between them shifted. Quietly, without either of them naming it, Roman began appearing where Nadia was, not in a way that felt like surveillance, just present. He would bring his work to the library in the evenings while she read. He joined her at dinner, instead of eating alone in his office every night the way he had before. He asked her once, with a bluntness that caught her off guard, what her life had looked like before all of this, and she told him. The diner, the double shifts, paying rent since she was 17, the apartment where the heating broke every January, and her mother called the landlord but never followed up. He listened the way people do when they have been alone long enough that they have almost forgotten what it feels like to have someone speak to them like they are just a person. She learned things about him in fragments. The syndicate had come together after Elena died. Grief turned inward, shaped into structure and control, because that was the only way he knew how to keep moving. He had not truly trusted anyone in years. He and Marco had grown up in the same broken part of the city, doing small, dangerous jobs before either of them was old enough to understand what they were stepping into. She told him things too, about the way her mother used to call her useful instead of daughter, about how she used to save small amounts of money in a jar under her bed until Irene found it and spent it without saying a word. Roman listened to all of it without interrupting once. 8 weeks after Nadia arrived at the estate, Irene Voss appeared at the front gate. She had not come to apologize. She had managed to find herself a new debt, larger than before, and she had come to renegotiate terms. Specifically, she wanted her daughter back so she could make a different kind of arrangement with the people she now owed. Nadia was told before Roman went to the gate. She heard the news and watched the feeling drain slowly out of her hands. It was not surprise. It was the specific, familiar pain of hoping, even quietly, even without admitting it, that someone would be different this time, and being wrong. Roman walked to the gate alone. He did not raise his voice. He stood in front of Irene and spoke at a low, even volume, the kind of quiet that fills a space more completely than shouting ever could. He told her that Nadia was not collateral. She was not a bargaining chip. She was not something to be passed around to cover someone else's carelessness. He told Irene that if she came back, or if she tried to reach Nadia through any person or any channel, he would make sure that no one in the city would extend her so much as $1 for the rest of her life. Irene looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned around and left. Nadia watched from the upstairs window. When Roman came back inside and looked up and saw her standing there, neither of them spoke. But something settled between them in that moment, the way a question that has been hanging in the air for weeks finally gets answered without anyone saying a word. 2 weeks later, Roman came to find her in the library. He told her that her mother's original debt had been cleared. A car was ready whenever she wanted it. Money had been placed in an account in her name, enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere far from her mother, and far from all of this. He said it simply, the way a man reads the last line of a contract he has fulfilled. Nadia looked at him for a moment. Then she asked him why. "Because you deserve to have a choice," he said. "You've never really been given one before." She was quiet for a while. Then she asked him something nobody had asked Roman Cassel in a very long time. "What do you want?" He did not answer right away. The silence stretched long enough that it became its own kind of answer. "For you to not look at me the way everyone else does," he finally said. "How does everyone else look at you? Like I'm only what I've done." Nadia nodded slowly. She reached down and picked up her bag from beside the chair. Then she set it back down on the floor. "I'm staying," she said. "Not because I owe you anything. Because I want to." 3 years later, Nadia runs a small, quiet foundation. No headlines, no public attention. Just steady, careful work, helping young women in the city who have been failed by the people who should have protected them. Roman still runs his world. It has not become something clean or simple, and neither of them pretends otherwise. But the East Wing is no longer locked, and on Elena's birthday every year, there are fresh wildflowers left outside her door. He still does not talk about it, but he no longer eats dinner alone, and that was the unexpected thing the Mafia boss did. He chose her back.